Welcome to the self-sovereign identity track. Luckily, I've got more than 2 minutes now to talk about self-sovereign identity. And I'm here to inform you about all the things you always wanted to know about self-sovereign identity and might have been unable to ask or maybe even afraid to ask. Self-sovereign identity, and just to bring up the poster we created about our challenge within the Odyssey Hackathon, is complex. And like I said on the main stage, it looks simple because basically why should we do things differently than we do today? And what's the benefit of doing things digitally? But in reality, if you come to think of it, and I hope actually that's one of the reasons you are all here, it might be quite challenging, and at the same time also gives you quite a lot of new ideas, new opportunities, new possibilities, and hopefully even new insights when it comes to how we are organized in our society, how we do things, how we see our future, how we want to be more inclusive when it comes to people around you, how we want to do or conduct our business in a more trustworthy, more transparent way, and also how we are going to basically create a society around trust. It has nothing to do with identity, so it's about trust. Because identity is one form of identifying yourself and sharing personal or identifiable information. And if I would ask any of you, what is your identity? And if you're really honest, who of you would say your name? In my case, I'm Andrew. Who would say that? Quite a few, yeah. And if I would ask the same question again, and to think about, especially for the Dutch people or any other any other method in other countries, who would answer my authentication method, my DigiD or my IDIN? Probably no one, right? The identity future is going to be a combination of both, because you want to identify yourself, but at the same time, you also want to make sure that the identity you use cannot be misused and that it can be trusted, both from your perspective, but also from the person or people or organization receiving that information. That's basically the challenge we set out to solve. In my introduction, because I trust that we are here at the Odyssey Hackathon, some of you are technical, probably more technical than I ever would be. And I can see a couple of you whom I know that can actually do this. Some of you are more on a business focus or organizational focus. And I think in this track especially, we need to combine everything together. So I'm not going to focus on the technology, although it's an important part of this challenge. I'm also not going to focus on the things that are impossible, but I first want to focus on what we think is really important as part of the self-sovereign identity track. And for that, I also go back a little for the Odyssey Hackathon, because there has been a self-sovereign identity track as part of the hackathon from the early onset, from the start. And everybody was involved in identity, but it was more about authentication. It was more about how to interact and how to put things together for other organizations, or actually even solutions where you would say, I am the big information gathering unit, so give me all your data and I can tell you who you are. That's not self-sovereign. So you are aware. I also got a comment from Marjan, what I said on the main stage. I might have made a mistake, or you might have misinterpreted me when I talk about identity. It's not legally enforced identity, because every transaction has some form of identity, and the important word here is some form. It can also be an anonymous form or any other how do you say it? Attestation given by any other organization or person. But it's actually yours to control. That's also really important. It's self-sovereign. So please don't get this wrong. We're looking for teams that help us solve the future identity issues and challenges we face. We also want to support from this track other teams of the other 20 challenges out there with identity components, because, like I said, it's not about technology, because there is already quite a lot of technology, but the technology is not interconnected, especially not interoperable. It's really difficult to make everything work together and in a transparent and understandable way. So this track is about using or utilizing existing technologies, building on top of that, creating something that actually is worthwhile using, that's interoperable, that's trustworthy, that's transparent, and actually can also be used in all the other tracks. So we've got a sandbox of existing technologies for you to use and to build upon. We also have people in the teams, supporting the teams from a legal perspective or a governance perspective, because it's, like I said, not everything is technical. This is basically what we are going to put together, and what we invite you to join us with during the hackathon. And it's really important because, and this is, I would kind of make this a motivational speech why you should join and why you should be part of this track. Because I think as you are here today, we kind of have a sensation that, like the Wright brothers, we know we're going to fly. We can see the technology out there, and it just needs to be put together in the right way. And this is the promise they saw, as like, it just needs to happen, and we need to make it happen, and we have to, well, be gutsy about it, and we also have to learn. So, although I would love for you as a team to come up with the right solution that's going to be launching us towards 21st century even further and make things even better, this most probably will happen first. It's not a crash, and that's really important. It's a learning opportunity. And the learning opportunity I see here, and especially with the Odyssey Hackathon, is that we are going to learn this, do this together. Like we're also focusing on this track together with Ministry of Interior's Digicampus and the Dutch Blockchain Coalition, and of course all the members of the coalition. We need to learn together. This is the important thing. And of course, when we come to it, we will, at a certain point in time, know how to fly. And we will take off, and we will make this work, we will make this happen. And we need to do this together. And the most challenging part here is that we need to do this together while we might envision a great future. There was a giant leap from the Wright brothers to the Dakota DC-3. They could imagine looking forward. This they never could have imagined. So please, even though that we want to imagine the future even further, as we are here today, contemplate on this, fantasize about this, but we just don't know. I mean, I didn't know that a mobile phone would look like this 20 years ago. And I was really happy when I saw the first mobile phone. I really thought like, hey, I can call people and can send text messages. We can't imagine this, but we need to take the first step. We need to learn how to fly, and we need to learn how to work a self-sovereign digital identity towards the future. That's the biggest challenge. And why do we see this as a big challenge? And this is also from a governmental perspective, but also from a societal perspective. It is an enabler for digital transformation. We already order online. We go to the supermarket and try to do everything online. We live in a digital space. We live in a digital world. But today, and we know that as a problem, our digital world is intransparent, not trustworthy. It's governed by either federated organizations or federated states, or maybe even big tech companies, and they make it really complex. It's really difficult to solve these problems. And we're kind of knotted up. And like I said before, we're not focusing on technology only, we're focusing on making these things, these layers possible. And might even be that the most important one is on top. It's really something for you within the Odyssey Challenge to think about. The user is, the end user needs to understand this and it needs to be able to use this. The governance instills trust. The legal and compliance instills and makes sure that everything works. Technology is something that makes that happen. And I would invite you all, help us shape the future. Let's think of brilliant things to do this and how to make this happen. And we are here to support you pre-hackathon, but we're also here, going to be here to support you after the hackathon to make this really work. Thank you very much. We now go to a panel discussion, and
does these work?
It should.
Sorry, it did a minute. Okay.
Yeah, it works.
Can I invite the panel members to the floor, please?
Yeah. For the panel discussion, we have Jacob Boersma moderating, and he's going to introduce everybody else.
Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jacob Boersma. I also work for the Dutch Blockchain Coalition, helping to make self-sovereign identity a reality. And we have to go further deeper into the reasons of this challenge. We have a very interesting panel, if I say so myself. I'll ask them to the first question, and I'll also introduce them briefly. So I'm going to start from right to left. Starting with Wouter Welling. He's a coordinator of digital identity at the Ministry of the Interior and Kingdom Relations. So very important stakeholder, of course, in digital identity in the Netherlands. And Wouter, I'm going to ask you, like everybody else, what makes it, from your perspective, digital identity a challenge that we need to solve, and especially why do we need self-sovereign identity for that?
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Well, I could mention almost 100 things, but when it comes to self-sovereign identity, two questions are mostly on my mind. Working on it, it is how serious are we on the self-sovereign part? Are we really sure about this? Do we really trust people with all their attributes in transactions they perform in society? That's the questions we're having as a government. Really, are we really serious about this self-sovereign aspect? And then, if we have this hypothetical future where we have as self-sovereign as possible identities in society, do we trust people fully with their own identity? That's another question I'm working on at the moment. So I'm very enthusiastic about the possibilities, and I just said to Christopher that I loved his paper in 2017, which for me, first time clearly explained the concept, but I'm still having some questions, but I'm hoping some people will have answers.
Thanks, Wouter. Yeah, let's hope that's what we're doing this challenge for, after all. A second panel member, I'd like to introduce Marjan van der Plas. She's an innovation manager at the ABN AMRO Bank. She's been managing blockchain and cryptocurrency partnerships and ecosystems for the past years, and is a very strong supporter also of the self-sovereign identity work done at the Dutch Blockchain Coalition. And for you, the same question, Marjan. From a bank's perspective, why would you need self-sovereign identity? Why is it a challenge we need to solve?
I'm going to skip the bank perspective, but that's not because I don't want to answer it as a bank, but I think it's a broader subject that is bigger than banks even, so that's why I'm going to do it broader. I think one thing is for sure is the current situation, the current status. I think is frightening. In a way, we have been digitizing. Internet is developing as we speak, and we kind of lost our digital identity in the internet space. So if I look at myself, how much information is scattered around the internet, I don't have a clue. I sometimes have to submit all my personal information. Sometimes I have to send a scan from my passport. Where is it? Where is it being stored? Who's doing what with it? Is it going to be sold? That, I think, is the frightening part. And if I go back to the analog... Do I need to start again?
The AIs are also very much listening and trying to solve the identity problem.
So okay, then let's go back to the analog history of things, and also to address your question. I have my passport and my driver's license at home, and I have to take really good care of it. I have my diploma from my education at home. I have my passwords in a safe place. So I'm already taking care of things also on the physical side. Like I have perhaps a watch that I have to take care of. So I'm not that dumb. I know how to guard my value, and if it's value to me, I will be safekeeping it. So the only challenge that we have is how can we take the advantages of the analog world back into the digital space and make sure that that we as a society enable a safe and secure way of managing identities in a broader sense. So not just passport, but also social media stuff, everything that you have digitally online that you need to prove your identity. So the challenge is here how to do that in a trustworthy and secure way, giving as much self-sovereignty back to the people that own their own identity. So that is the big challenge. That is complex, but I think it's the aim we should be looking for.
Interesting. So how do we get the benefits of analog, but also not throw away the benefits of digital, of course? So interesting. Yeah, great challenge. I'm glad I don't have to solve this, but everybody else has to. So as our third panel member, we have Sofie Berns. She founded the digital innovation team at Berns, but currently she is advising the board of directors at the city of Utrecht, and as well as also being active at B Amsterdam, a startup incubator, helping to develop digital identity for business and individuals. So again, for you, the question: from a local government perspective, what does digital identity and self-sovereign identity mean for you?
Well, I think as a local government, we feel that the needs of our citizens are actually changing. They expect us to be fast and proactive, and we have to meet these needs because they're actually the base of our right of existence. And I think self-sovereign identities can enable us because they could enable us to be shift from actually reactive and examining more to a role proactively and enabling. So I think that's the big challenge we feel. How can we make that shift as a government? And I think trust, it's already mentioned, is one big thing within this challenge. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think we all agree that trust is an important keyword here. Very interesting to hear what Christopher has to say on that. Christopher Allen, of course, has already been mentioned a few times today. Most of you will know him maybe as the author of the 10 principles of self-sovereign identity. He was also a big contributor to the SSL and TLS standards that we all still use daily. He will also be holding a much longer keynote on self-sovereign identity tomorrow. So I hope you all will also join for that. But for now, we've given him a much shorter time to maybe you can add to what the previous panel members also mentioned and kind of fill in the gaps. Where do you see the missing pieces to make identity really self-sovereign?
Thank you. So I'm a technologist. I'm a coder, cryptographic protocol designer, etc. So I have a tendency to want to get in the gears and do things. The technologists want to solve all these problems. We want to address these challenges and these attacks and stuff. But at its root, the thing we really have to care about is that we have to reclaim the dignity and respect that we deserve and are entitled to in the physical world. That goes back to the principles of the Enlightenment. The integrity of our bodies, the integrity of our thoughts, and our ability to communicate. Whatever, we have to bring that same respect and dignity to the digital world, and that's really what started all of this. Is that if we don't consider this, some people say it's ideology, and some people confuse self-sovereign identity as, I rule. Okay, that's not it. It's that the world is in a state right now where all these different institutions, all these different bodies are renegotiating what sovereignty means. In the same way that the Westphalian Convention way back when created the modern nation state, we're in the midst of Brexit, and we have Edinburgh we have Scotland wanting to leave Britain, and then Edinburgh and other cities want to negotiate their sovereignty, and then we have Facebook wanting to negotiate their sovereignty in a multinational way against what Google is doing. So the world is renegotiating what sovereignty means, and we don't have a voice there. We end up, if we're not careful, we'll just be slaves to this mechanism of everybody else's sovereignty, where they all claim us and we all get torn to pieces. So that's really for me the root of self-sovereign identity. I picked a very tough sounding word for that. It was very controversial when I said, no, we're going to call this self-sovereign identity. But I think it's worth it. I think it's worth it to be thinking, where are those lines so that I can be a peer to all of these other bodies that are, renegotiating the way the world's going to be working in the future.
Thanks. Yeah, let's not get into the discussion on whether or not it should be called self-sovereign identity. I think it's a very fascinating discussion, but probably not something that we can solve in 10 minutes. What I did wanted to ask you, because I think that's very interesting for the teams and potential teams here, is how will the solution for a self-sovereign identity differ from what we already have? Because it's not that we don't have identities. It's not that we don't have digital identities. We maybe have even way too many of them. So we have one from the Dutch government. We have identities from the banks. We have lots of tech companies that provide us with identities. I don't know who would like to answer first, but what do we see as the change that needs to happen to make the current versions of identities real self-sovereign identities or practical self-sovereign identities?
Well, I'll just open with the thing that I have great sympathy, for instance, what cities have to do. Because cities, you don't get a ID that says I'm a citizen of Utrecht or I'm a citizen of some other. Instead, they have to rely on all of these other parties who create authentication and authorization to do different types of things. So I think cities are a real interesting place. So I wanted to pass it to you to answer the question.
Okay, and then afterwards, because Wouter also is jumping at the bit.
Well, I think that's completely true. Like, information is scattered right now, and as a city, we do have information concerning who am I, so the ID part, but we don't have a lot of information concerning what do I have or what is my medical status or etc. We only have few parts of the information we need to do actually our job as good as possible. We only have very little information, and most of the times we don't even own the information. We receive them from other parties. So that's, I think, a huge question. How can we combine these types of information to really use them?
I think maybe a good example is I was involved in the digital identity track of the hackathon last year, and there were several teams working on identity solutions, and they were having really mind-blowing ideas and concepts. And what was one of the hardest challenges is to bring, let's say, the real world as we have it at the moment, with all those registries and large, let's say, verifiers of claims in our society, and the world of what the people at the hackathon were building. And what I saw at the last hackathon, that there were a lot of, my iPhone is full of apps claiming to have the SSI solution that you should have. Interoperability is going to be the thing, I think, and that's very boring because it's mostly about, let's say, protocol level and how do we, let's say, interchange or share claims or have an infrastructure or to share claims on, and what should be the role of supervision within the way we exchange claims. So I think interoperability, someone who has a good idea about that, is gonna be very successful.
Okay, so less apps, not just another app added to the whole portfolio. Okay.
Yeah, I like to add to that. I think I fully agree that interoperability is very important. And I think one of the main challenges is also synchronization, because you already mentioned there are lots of different already solutions or ideas, but also a lot of interpretation about identity itself. I've spoken to many people about identity, and I noticed that everybody has a different interpretation or opinion or definition even. So I see it like, it's like Andrew already showed the pyramid. There's a lot of, it's not technology, it's also governance, it's rule book, it's definitions, it's everything. So how do you make sense of it all? And the problem is that if you don't have a basic sketch and you agree on that basic sketch, you start painting and everybody can paint and well. But then you get a Mondrian with lines, you get sunflowers from Van Gogh, and you have like a portrait of Mona Lisa. They're all beautiful paintings, but they're totally different. So if you don't first start agreeing on the basic approach of that one painting you want to sketch, then everybody can take different materials and everything else. But that basic framework needs to be in place before you start building things too. And the building can start as well, because you can learn from it. So it's like a feedback loop, but you need also to take care of the basic sketch before you start running.
Cool. So we need to agree on ground rules, and we need to build an infrastructure that doesn't look like everything is just ramblingly built on top of each other.
You need the same. You need the same starting point, so to speak, or
speaking the same language as well,
and speaking the same language, but also start building on somehow more or less the same framework or concept, because otherwise you start, ending up with very different things.
True, but also standardization is a very hard problem to solve.
Yeah, and I think as a government, we're also looking into how can we make a digital identity inclusively enough. So, for example, existing solutions for recovering an identity are appointing delegates, but this seems to be not even simple enough for all our citizens to be able to cope with. It seems not to be inclusively enough, just one of the examples.
So I'm deeply involved in the standards movement. I'm an invited expert on the decentralized identity and verifiable credentials work at the W3C, et cetera. There are interesting challenges because first off, I'm not sure we have all the answers, so we don't want to lock in answers too soon. But there's also you want to enable decentralization, but not too much decentralization. If you and I have to completely agree on one set of things about how our relationship works, and I have to do it completely different with you, the transaction cost of coming up with what those things are is too high. So a lot of what we're trying to do with self-sovereign identity is not lock ourselves at high levels in single sources of trust. Obviously, that's an easy one. But even other kind of more insidious forms of centralization that could put us at risk. It's a balancing act. One of the challenges I put to you in the community is that participation, like I came out here for the DID face-to-face in Amsterdam. Most of the people there are with large companies or VC-backed organizations or whatever, so they don't necessarily have the voice of some of your people in civil society. We don't have the Red Cross there. Red Cross has said that they really need this stuff because they're crossing borders all the time and they can't deal with everybody's national ambitions on identity. They just want to get you the help that you need, and of course the individuals. So we need these kinds of smaller groups or less well represented groups, diverse groups of populations, etc., to have a voice in these standards. I can kind of stand up and say, I think that this would be good for immigration population or for Africa or whatever. Reality is I can only guess. And so how do we get that inclusivity?
Yeah, and I think that definitely touches on one of the basic principles that we want to have for this track and for this challenge, is that you want to find that balancing act between making something that works, not spending all your time trying to get to the ideal standards, because we probably won't be able to do that, not even in a hackathon of 48 hours, but really build something that works, that is practical, that can be used, but that also is ready. Yeah, it is keeps in mind that it needs to be broader than just that one use case. So we have a few minutes left for the panel part. So I want to give a few people in the audience also the ability to question. I see somebody there in the back, and then somebody here in the front. And there's probably multiple people. But I'll walk over to you with the microphone. Short question.
Yeah. My question is just about the role that you think design has to play in it, because I think that's maybe the biggest gap between, tech protocols and usability is that, most people in talking about inclusivity are not going to be able to use a command line or something like that. How do you see that being bridged over, if at all, in the sort of self-sovereign SSI community? Thank you.
The first challenge of design is you have to know who you're designing for. And we do, we have things like the Yoram use case, which is a refugee use case. We have, a medical use case for DIDs, a focal use case that's being worked on, et cetera. We don't have enough of that. And I also don't think we're taking it far enough before we sometimes dive in to architecture. More use cases, more looking at the user experience. I mean, I just spent a month trying to solve her problem where she was trying to go, but this recovery, how do we get, people are going to lose their keys. And, as a technologist, I can say, well, I'm going to give you a 2 of 3s, and you're going to do this, social recovery thing. No, people aren't going to want to know that. They're going to want to first maybe give a social key to their wife or their spouse or somebody they really, really, truly trust. And then they might be able to persuade them a few others. So how do we do this in a very human fashion where they don't need to understand the tech?
Anybody else? With the user perspective, how do we make sure that it is a usable solution for everybody?
What Christopher just said is one of the problems we're having. We are working now, and half of the room, which is Dutch, will probably know this, on a law which is called digital government, or so, Wet Digitale Overheid, law digital government, and it contains some aspects on authorization, identification, and authentication. And there are huge interests at stake there, which are financial interest or power interest, whatever, in society. And what we're seeing as a central government, that it's hard to get the right voices to lobby yourself. And those are mostly the voices of people who have a strong interest in a good, well-governed, self-sovereign digital identity, but are very not so good at finding their way towards government. So I think maybe this is, let's say, not public policy, but my point of view is maybe in central government we're not the best at letting designers make features which are usable for every group in society, but we should be aware of our incompetence in that field and involve ourselves with creative parties who can reach, let's say, more vulnerable people in society.
Thanks. Yeah, that's we won't quote you on that in the news. There was a question here in the front.
Yeah, I'm missing another perspective in your story, because you're all talking about building identities and the users having to use it and the infrastructure involved, and I think you touched briefly on it. But what about the service providers, the relying parties who are going to use it? What is needed to get them away from traditional user password accounts where they are very smug at, to start adopting this? And don't tell me it's standardization, because that's not the answer. But who is looking into that? Because they're the big adopters. And if you're talking users, I'm thinking service providers, not individuals with an identity. I'm sorry.
Very good question, because actually, a lot of the people on the stage actually represent very big relying parties as well, because we as individuals will need to identify ourselves towards the city.
We have an identity because they need it.
Well, I think we also want an identity to interact among ourselves, but I think I definitely agree with you that citizen to government, be it local or central, customer to bank, is definitely a very, very massive amount of use cases around that. So how can we get, how are you seeing that? How can we get the relying parties to also trust these self-sovereign identities rather than the identities that they're used to, namely the ones that they issue themselves?
Yeah, well, the only thing that comes to my mind is one is change, and do you want to be part of change? Then that is something. Yeah, no, but this is something that you need to also be willing to be part of that change. If I'm talking about ABN AMRO, we are a member of which is willingly and voluntarily from the Dutch Blockchain Coalition. And one of the things that in the consensus that we had in the founding of this organization, we together decided that self-sovereign identity was something that we needed to change or at least work on. And that was for two reasons. One is we felt a level of urgency that this is really a problem waiting to be solved. But the problem is not to be solved lightly. You can't solve it alone. You need an ecosystem to solve it. And the ecosystem needs to have representatives from all the parties involved together to make that change. So the only thing I can say, I cannot decide for the service providers, but I think, yes, they should be part of that ecosystem for sure. And I would also call back on them to say, okay, listen, become part of the ecosystem. I know that several are in the audience. They are also part of the Dutch Blockchain Coalition. And everybody is welcome. So I think this is definitely a joint effort.
I think what I see within at least local governments is that we're very scared to make mistakes. So as soon as we would use self-sovereign identity and someone somewhere would find a problem with using this, we would feel like, oh, we're losing the trustworthiness we've been building on for years. And I think that's something we're trying to work on, at least in municipality of Utrecht, working on trying to not define the end products of new technologies, whatever, if it's a self-sovereign identity or using AI within our public services. But we're trying to, like, learning by doing and trying to learn to learn. This sounds a bit weird, but we're not used to learning. We're used to defining an end product, trying to make that 100% correct, and then starting to use it. And that, I think that mind shift is slowly coming up now. Yeah.
I mean, so one of the challenges for this relationship of where do governments fit in to be able to be a relying party, other groups to be relying parties, the grocery store that doesn't accept my card, because I'm from the United States and we still have stupid old cards. Yeah. So, but I think a key role that the government can have, at least for themselves as relying parties and as issuers of these things, is to be careful. They should be setting kind of a high-level policy, and when they do actually set requirements, they should be maybe a little bit more aspirational than specific. Like one of my concerns was, say, EIDAS, I'm not sure that there could be a race for the top, in the sense that people will go, well, why would anybody do a level, middle in here, much less the level bottom? No, everybody, if you want to spend a penny, you've got to have a EIDAS level 4. I forgot what the levels are. And there could be a race for the top, and the risk of that is what happened with SSL TLS, where we actually ended up having a race for the bottom at the top. So we had this situation where, originally certificates were going to be these real high level authority and lots of checking, maybe even like a detective would, check to see if you were physically in that building and all that kind of stuff. And now it's raced to the bottom because the marketplace cannot support that level of requirement on a server. So, I think that part of the role in the partnership between governments and industry here is to set some policy and in an aspirational way.
Thanks. I'm going to have to cut it off here because we also have some closing remarks by Giulietta from Digicampus. Hopefully, everybody who still has questions will also be able to ask our panel members or us during the break. And otherwise, you have another chance at 3 o'clock if you wanna join the second session. But Giulietta, can I give you the floor? Then and I want to really thank our panel members. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I'll do it without sheets. I'll start. Well, we actually
There you go.
formulated already some questions before the panel. I was very happy that the panel almost ticked every of them. So what are we going to need your help by in this SSI track is the main questions are how can we build trust? We already heard it. How can we stimulate adoption for solutions? There are already a lot of solutions, but how are we going to make sure they're going to be used in the near future? That's very important. How do we get interoperability? And what governance is needed? Okay, so these are questions that we have and that we hope that you can help us with. We really would like to have some multidisciplinary teams. So we would like you to create a solution that has aspects on human experience, business process, legal aspects, and technology. Okay, so look at every aspect of self-sovereign identity and the question that I just mentioned. So what are we asking you to do? Andrew already told you, and it's not just helping us or building a new concept, but it's also enabling the other teams. Everybody needs a digital identity solution, okay? And everybody needs the conditions to be able to use them filled in, okay? So it's not only about your team, but it's also about connecting to other teams. That will be very important for us. You can use the infrastructure of the sandbox, so we're going to provide all the solutions that are really there and are open source to you, so use them. And you can win bounties, okay? And the bounties are very important. Connect to other teams, like I already said. Make it multidisciplinary, so governance, law, technology, human-centered. And make it interoperable, okay? So that's a very important challenge. And one thing, we don't know where we're going yet. That's also what everybody's saying. So surprise us, because maybe we are not asking the right questions. Maybe we don't see things yet. So if you have a really good idea, something you did not hear today from the panel or from us, please send in your request and join with the team or find a team. Okay, so surprise us. We're really looking forward to the new ideas and everything that we don't see yet. There were some questions about how to inscribe as a team. You can do that on the Odyssey website, but also let us know. That, or when you're trying to find a team, also let us know. Maybe we can help by matchmaking. That's very important. After the hackathon, I'm from Digicampus, and we will help the winning prototypes or more prototypes we'll see to further develop their concept and test within our own sandbox and environment. Okay, so we're going to help you further afterwards. And also the Dutch Blockchain Coalition will help all the multidisciplinary teams and solutions further on. Okay, so connect with us now with Andrew, me, and Jacob, and we will see you at the hackathon, but also afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very, very much. You have some closing words, Andrew?
I just wanted to say I'm really happy that you are here, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you at the Odyssey Hackathon. Don't be a stranger beforehand, especially don't be a stranger afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.